should be good to go.
Welcome back. I'm registered dietitian Myrna Haag. Another YouTube video giving you impactful nutrition information that will change your life. What we're going to talk about is how certain diets, certain foods can affect your free will. Because at the end of the day, it's not about making sure you're eating this or not eating that. I mean, sure, it helps from a health perspective, but there's actually a chemical balance that goes on in your brain that can determine the free will. What you eat, what you don't eat, isn't based on a system of, well, I just lost the willpower, didn't exercise enough, that's why I'm gaining weight. It actually has to do with how foods can affect the hypothalamus, the appetite center. So I'm going to give you in this video some really key points that you can change that. Because remember, a lot of these diabetes and weight loss medications are all about affecting the appetite center in the brain. That's why people are losing weight, because it actually blocks some of these appetite triggers. And this is why they're losing weight. And we can do it naturally with food if we know how. So, Sam, if you'll switch me over to the PowerPoint, let's get rolling. So, how certain diets hijack your free will. Because bottom line, if you don't have free will, you aren't going to make it. Now, look, I'm not saying that you can't get on the keto diet, and that diet, yeah, you can lose weight on it. You know, it takes out a lot of water from the body. It can reduce some of your appetite, but there's some key points, and we're going to talk about it in this video, why that doesn't work. Because it still affects a certain appetite neurotransmitter that might get you through keto for a week or two, but you're always going to need that cheat day. And that, my friend, can get you in big trouble. So let's talk about how we can get back our free will, our body's way of naturally regulating our appetite. So let's first talk about free will. That's the ability to choose between alternative courses of action. Free will means like, well, maybe I'll eat this, maybe I won't. I have a free will. Bottom line, when you're in an addictive, compromised state, you lose your ability for free will. Your brain actually gets hijacked. What a lot of people don't realize is obesity is putting you in a hijacked phenomenon. You are already in a state where you have lost your free will. Now, a lot of people think of it opposite, right? Like, wow, okay, if I'm obese, that must mean I've had a lot of free will. I can eat whatever I want, because otherwise, why would somebody gain all that weight? It's actually the opposite of what you think. That's what's crazy. Topsy-turvy. It's the opposite. Being in an obese situation, being in a situation where you have really even 20 or 30 pounds overweight, changes hormones in your brain, changes some of these neurotransmitters that locks you into a hijacked brain. And we all know that because, let's face it, one serving ought to be enough, especially if I'm overweight. And we talked about it in last week's live stream. We talked about leptin, one of the hormones that affects the hypothalamus. And if it's supposed to work right, it's supposed to turn off our appetite when we become overweight. And it stops working like it should. So bottom line, when you are overweight, you're in a hijacked situation. And what we're going to talk about in this video is some key points how to get out of that situation by eating certain foods. How to get out of a hijacked situation. So in this study, it talks about free will and the obesity epidemic. And it basically states that obesity is really not based on our own free will. Now, a lot of times I see a lot of research and they talk about, well, you just have to have more willpower. You have to have this behavior thing. And hopefully, if you watch some of my YouTube videos, I bring the science to the table, showing you it's just not all based on this willpower thing. Like you just don't have the behavior you need to make it right. It goes a little more sciencey than that. What's happening up in the brain. And this study talks about an empirical analysis of the literature suggests that an increased weight can be accounted for by an increase in food take. Well, duh, we kind of know that one, right? The solution to the obesity epidemic, therefore, must be to center on reduction of food consumption, a position well accepted by the American population, who think that they, as individuals, are responsible for their gaining weight. The belief that the decision as to what and how much to eat is determined by their own free will. And what this study is saying, that the evidence demonstrates, however, this is not the truth. And that's what I've been saying all along. In fact, if you are overweight, it's like you're caught in a prison. It's almost like you feel driven to hit those pleasure modes to continue to gain the weight. This talks about despite the plethora of diets, weight loss clubs, drugs, and mechanical devices available to facilitate weight loss, once treatment is terminated, and that means you're getting off the diet, and people return to the free environment, okay, now they get their free will back, their weight returns to pre-treatment levels. And I have a whole talk about that. First of all, if you are on a diet, you're not in a chemically balanced place, and the body is on a constant feedback loop system. I say if you want to keep the weight off, which is what we're trying to do, is get to our leanest weight naturally, the most healthy that we can, it requires understanding how these macronutrients work: protein, fiber, carbs, and fat. And in this video, I'm going to really focus on carbs because that can trigger some real chemical feedback loops that keep you in that obesogenic state. So basically what they're saying here is that, wow, when you get off that restrictive diet, you seem to go right back. And the reason why you go right back is because you didn't learn to eat right to begin with. You were on a diet, and diets can create chemical imbalances that when you get off of them, the body does the feedback loop. That's why we gain it all back. So they're basically acknowledging in this study that, yeah, in some ways, they don't really tell you why entirely, but they're saying, yeah, in some ways, we really don't think it's all behavior because we've got some evidence to show that maybe this isn't entirely true. Now, they do say that daily weight monitoring and accepting their food behavior is not free choice. And that isn't. That's to me a trap. When you got to constantly be watching every calorie and weighing everything. I mean, who can live in that environment? When the body will do it naturally for you. There's a lot of people, by the way, billions of people in the world that are at their ideal body weight. You can go to other countries. They're not obese and they're not counting calories. What's going on there? There's this chemical balance, maybe some things they're doing that you're not doing, that we're going to show you how you can. So obesity and the neurocognitive basis of food reward and control of intake. That's the main focus in this study. And they talk about hedonic eating. And hedonic eating is pleasure eating. Of course, everybody's like, well, of course, eating's always pleasurable, right? Well, it goes a little more beyond that. The brain actually clicks in to brain eating, where it actually gets hijacked, where you keep eating because it feels good, not necessarily because you need the energy or the food, but the body actually gets hijacked in the brain because it clicks into a system where the body goes into this reward center, and it's not based on what your metabolic needs are. So really, there's no such thing about cognitive control in this state. You can't really have a free will when the body is being hijacked, when the brain is taking over because it's trying to produce this constant pleasure, this hedonic feeling, this chemical imbalance. You are not in cognitive control. Now, you may think you are, but you're not. And when you're in an obese condition, this is very prevalent. The body just keeps doing a loop round and round that keeps you in that obese cycle. And this is what a food addiction model is all about. So this particular study talks about how, this hedonic eating is thought to be driven by the reward of food consumption and not actually by the metabolic need, which means that you're really hungry and you need food. And this is focused attention on the brain reward system and how its dysregulation may cause overeating and obesity. So let's jump right into it and give you the solution. So I show that in the brain, there's such a thing that the body eats really from the neck down. And I always refer this to kind of balanced eating. It's, the body wants food because it needs it metabolically, it needs the fuel. And then we have this hedonic form of eating that kind of stays up in the brain. And this is where food addiction takes place. And what happens is the brain becomes hijacked. The body actually has these little receptors that follow these little brain behavior paths, this neuroplasticity, that makes you repeat that behavior to click on these receptor sites in the appetite center in the brain. And these receptor sites are very sensitive to certain chemicals. And the chemicals that they're sensitive to come from insulin, gut bacteria, and muscles giving them messages. So basically, we're going to talk about muscles, gut bacteria, and actually the insulin regarding the blood sugar swings that can cause these messengers to go, these peptides to go into the brain and dink and really hit on these pleasure centers, these dopamine centers, neuropeptide Y, some of the ones that are known to create a feedback loop where you just keep eating and eating to hit more and more of these pleasure centers so it can feel better and better. And there's actually chemicals that are being produced to do that. Now, people always ask me, why the heck would the body ever be programmed to do that? And there's actually a really good reason. And here it is. When you were out in the wild and in the jungle and the killing was good and the buffalo meat was there on the rotisserie, it was juicy, had a lot of fat, and the actual fat and sugar reacted with some of these reward centers. And they triggered a continuation of eating even when you didn't need the calories. Because the body's like, hey, we need to get this buffalo all eaten up. We don't need for you to be satisfied. We want you to go to beyond that, eat way beyond that. When you go into a field and the food is ripe, we want you to eat all the fruit, because when the fruit is ripe in about a week, it's going to get spoiled. And that's nature's way of saying when something's super sweet and something's super fat, we want to eat a lot of it. Because that's how nature programmed us when refrigeration wasn't a thing. But now you take sugar and fat, put it in a lot of your food, and it in itself can trigger brain hedonic eating, where then all the signals of the body get nixed out. So that's one thing right there. Just add a lot of fat and sugar into your diet, and that can trigger a brain chemical continuous loop to want to keep eating. But there's also some other things that I want to talk about. We all kind of know that, right? Because we know we've maybe done our favorite little Oreo cookie and it turns into 10. And we don't even know what happened. We ate 2 Oreos and now we're down to, we're on the first column and we're not even tasting it. It just tastes so good. It just feels so good. But there's also some things I want to talk about that do the same type of triggering into the brain. It's what's going on in the muscle, gut bacteria, and insulin. So let's get right into that and understand that from a dietitian standpoint and the research I've done and working with patients, I have a lot of patients, they come in and they're like, I'm really frustrated because I have all this weight, I can't seem to lose it. And a lot of times that can be because of a condition, insulin resistance. We'll touch a little bit on that. But it's frustrating. It's really frustrating to keep dieting. I did the keto diet. I lost the 40 pounds. And then, 6 months later, I'm slowly putting it all back. or whatever diet I'm on is just like being at a turtle's pace. And they're tired of it. They're tired of living a world of dieting. And at some point, then comes body positivity, and I get it. Because at some point, you just say, all right, you know what, I'm just going to accept the fact that I'm going to be overweight because I can't live this life of constantly being in a torture chamber. Because that's what it feels like. You go Monday through Friday with your salads or whatever it is you're eating, and then on weekend, seriously, can't we all enjoy a decent weekend of normal eating? Because that's what it feels like. Only to find on Monday you've put on all the weight you lost Monday through Friday. And this is the turtle place. And I'm here to tell you, this is all has to do with being trapped into brain chemicals and not being able to balance the body with certain key points. So what I want to talk about, the key macronutrient, is how getting the carbohydrates right can reverse this. And the key that I really want to make sure that we understand, because I think a lot of people get confused, is that too little carbs, in other words, not enough carbs, can trigger food addiction. Because muscles are the key point for that one. Muscles will tell the brain when it doesn't have enough carbs to supply an active person. If you aren't real active, all right, I'll cut you a little slack. Maybe the carbs can be a little lower. But muscles have a glycogen capacity, which is just another word for glucose, which is just another word for carbohydrates. Muscles have a certain capacity they would like for you to maintain of carbohydrates. And we know the story. We've been on a low-carb diet, long and behold, 4 or 5 days, and you go out to dinner on Friday night, and you know what happens. Half the bread basket is gone. It's really tough to control yourself when you get around carbs if you've been restricting carbs. And that's because muscles find that opportunity to try to meet the capacity that you have been depleting. See it a lot with athletes. Yeah, they go through the day, they talk about how they ate super healthy and super lean, only to find out at night it becomes a food fast. You know what I'm talking about? A little bit of ice cream and then it's the popcorn, and they can't seem to shut it off. Okay, this is muscles responding to wanting more carbs. And it doesn't matter if you just got through eating a meal, you're not satisfied. And so I want to talk about how we can get the muscles satisfied, to turn off the brain chemicals to keep you in that hedonic state of eating. Because muscles with too little carbs can trigger that addictive state. Another thing we need to look at is unmanaged carbs. Too many carbs. So too little carbs cause muscle food addiction. Too many carbs can cause an insulin reaction, which we're going to talk about. So now we're understanding that insulin, the same carbs that muscle needed, insulin can be really screwed up if you don't know how to eat them correctly. And then the last one we want to talk about is gut bacteria. And carbohydrates are going to be your biggest source of good fibers. You got to search for them. So you're not going to find fiber in animal foods, right? You're going to find it in your carbohydrates. And why is that super important? Because low fiber carbs trigger a gut bacteria imbalance that once again triggers brain chemicals. So let's just repeat this from a carbohydrate standpoint. Too little carbs, muscles respond, and they trigger brain chemicals that make you keep doing the repeat cycle, eat and eat. Insulin, too many carbs, not understanding how to balance them, will then trigger in brain chemicals, too many carbs, where you just eat in and eat. Gut bacteria, that is not going to happen when you're doing when you're doing a keto diet or a low carb diet. You're not going to get the adequate gut bacteria because you're not getting the adequate fiber in these carbohydrates. And when that happens, these bad bacteria can change the palate. And here we go, staying in the brain chemicals round and round. So we can see that eating these carbohydrates to please these three areas is significant in turning off the hedonic form of eating. So let's talk about the muscle in length, we'll talk about insulin in length, and we're going to talk about the gut bacteria, how carbohydrates are all involved in these areas, and how you can take the control back. So when we think of the muscle wants carbs, especially if you're active. So for every gram of glucose, for every gram of carb that gets in that muscle to help supply the energy, you have 4 grams of water attached to that. So when you take in carbohydrates, you also hydrate the muscle, because every gram of glucose attaches to 4 grams of water. And when you reduce the carbs and you don't have carbohydrates in your diet, then you lose the water. So that's why you can drop 5-10 pounds on a low carb diet rather quickly. But are we really dropping fat? Absolutely, we do not know that. You might be dropping some fat, but the bottom line is that low carbs can cause some dehydration, especially if you're an athlete. And muscles want carbs. Too little, not meeting what your body needs, can trigger a food addiction later on, because muscles are gonna knock on that brain's door and say, hey, bring me the payday. I want those carbs, which means more sugar. That's what you're going to crave. So in the brain, muscles that get depleted of their capacity of what they can take in of carbs signal the brain to eat more carbs. When you eat more carbs, then you can have an insulin problem, which we'll get to next. But before we do that, let's figure out approximately how much carbs somebody actually needs. So this is going to be on average. We know that it's going to be anywhere from 45 to maybe 55% of your calories at your ideal body weight. And we'll talk about that because everybody thinks it's at the weight they weigh now, and it's not. Now, if you're really sedentary, you're morbid obese, you got some diabetes and insulin resistance, well, your percentage of carbs could be 40%, right? Because your capacity, your muscles' need for carbs are less. Because if you're morbid obese, you're not moving around a lot, muscles are not that demanding. But don't kid yourself. That doesn't mean you're at 20% carbs and think it's going to be a happy day, because muscles will crave them. So how do we figure out how many carbs we need? And this is my estimation as a registered dietitian. I've given you some formulas so you can work the numbers backwards. Here's how it works. Let's first figure out what our ideal body weight is, because to figure out the amount of carbs you need, by estimation, this will be about 45%. So it might be a little less if you're less active, maybe a little more if you're more active. You will take your ideal body weight and multiply that by 1.3, and that'll give you the amount of grams you need a day. So let's say your ideal body weight, I'm going to do the math, is 140 pounds, and you multiply that by 1.3. That's going to come up with 182 grams approximately a day that you need of carbohydrates at 45%. So how do we figure out ideal body weight? Easy formula, guys, easy formula. If you're a woman, you take, first of all, 5 feet is the cutoff. That's going to be 60 inches. So for every inch over 5 feet, you're going to add 5 pounds. You're going to start with 100 pounds as the base, and for every inch over 5 feet, you add 5 pounds. So if you're 5'2", your ideal body weight may be 110. If you're 5'4", your ideal body weight is 120. Now, what you can easily do is add 10 pounds to that for athletic or larger frame, and you're still going to be well within that healthy BMI. For a lot of my patients, I just usually go ahead and add the 10 pounds and we're right where we need to be. So for men, what we want to do is take for every inch over, again, the 5 feet, it's going to be 6 pounds. And it's going to be at 106. So we start with 106, and if this guy is 5'10", we take 106, we take the 10 inches times the 6 pounds, we add it to the 106, and we get 166. And we can easily add those 10 pounds to bring us back to the 176 mark, and they're still going to be well within a good BMI. So you want to look at doing your carbohydrates based on your ideal body weight, not based on your current weight, because that could be a disaster. If you weighed 220 pounds and your ideal body was really 140, you wouldn't figure out your carbs based on your heavier weight. It's your ideal weight, because your body wants you to be ideal. So that's a pretty good rule of thumb. So that gives us an idea approximately about how many grams of carbs on average the capacity for that muscle is for the average person. Now, if somebody's going to exercise, then for every hour of exercise, you can easily add 30 to 60 grams of carbs for every hour on top of that. So if you went 1 hour to the gym, you were in a spin class, and you were really hitting it hard, you would take 182 grams, and you could add easily, I'm not sure why my pen's not working. Let me see if I can get this thing to draw right. So if it was, what did we say, 180 grams of carbs, and then we go to the gym for an hour, and maybe we do an average spin class at 50, or maybe it was a lighter spin class at 30, but we would be at 210 grams. And in the exercise, 20 to 30 grams, that's a banana, folks. And I always tell people, bring it with you on your way to the gym. That way the muscle has the sugar right when it needs it. That would be a beautiful thing. And on average, for every cup of carbs, of starch, a cup of pasta, a baked potato that's a cup. And what's a cup? Open up your palm. Go ahead, everybody, open up the palm. That's about a cup. So if you have a big old baked potato sitting in there, 1 cup of carbs is going to be 45 to 50 grams. So you can see 180 grams is not that hard. 1 baked potato, easily a cup of pasta, right there, you're going to be at about 100 grams. 2 pieces of fruit, and you're almost there. So I think to understand how many carbs you need is super important, because muscles want carbs. Now let's talk about muscles wanting carbs and how insulin responds to that want, because now we're into a second problem with food addiction, is that we know we need the carbs. We know we need a certain amount of carbs, but if you don't eat them correctly, you can cause an insulin surge, which will cause brain chemicals to make you hungrier and want more food. So here's how it works. Every time you eat a carbohydrate, that carbohydrate goes into the bloodstream, and at the same time, the body releases insulin. And the insulin then attaches to the muscle's receptor site, the receptor site for insulin, and that receptor site allows a transporter to come to the surface of the muscle cell, and this is how the sugar gets inside the muscle. Insulin attaches to a receptor site that then talks to certain messengers in the cell. The sugar gets in the cell, and of course it binds with water. That's a beautiful thing. And in so many of my YouTube videos, I talk about this. This is the root cause of type 2 diabetes. This is the root cause of insulin resistance. And when you have this situation where a lot of excess fatty acids from eating way too much fat in your diet, or just being too fat and releasing these fatty acids, they can clog up this receptor site, and that can cause a problem where this transporter doesn't really make it to the surface, and now you have a situation where you're going to have more sugar in the blood, which causes more insulin. But let's get back to the carbs. causing a problem in your brain to eat more. When you have a lot of carbs in the bloodstream, whether because you're insulin resistant or maybe you just ate a lot of carbs, and you just have a lot of sugar in the blood, you're going to get a release of a lot of insulin. And here's just something you need to know. A lot of insulin in the blood means you're probably going to have a lot of hunger. That's a big problem. So what we don't want to do is release a ton of sugar in the blood, of course, unless we're exercising. When you exercise, these transporters will immediately come to the surface of the cell and bring all sugar that's in the blood right into the muscle. It's like the muscles know, hey, we're exercising, bring the sugar from the blood right in. But as a rule of thumb, when you're sitting at your desk doing work, it's not going to be the case. And this can cause more addiction because when you have a lot of insulin in the blood, it creates more of an appetite in the brain. So here's how we make this all go away. We know the muscles want carbs. We just want to make sure when we eat carbs that we eat them with a lot of fiber and we eat them with some protein. Because when you eat this carb with fiber and with protein, you're not going to get carbs in the bloodstream super fast. In fact, honestly, a lot of these carbs will go in a slower, more controlled fashion. Because first of all, fiber doesn't even leave the gut. It stays in the intestinal tract. It really makes it difficult for the body to unleash those carbs when it's all tangled up with fiber, and that's a good thing. Because then what happens are these carbs begin to release in a more controlled manner, and insulin is in a more controlled manner. It's not going to be surging in the blood, and you won't feel that hunger. You'll feel more satisfied. So the key with insulin is we want to bring fiber into those carbs. Load up the fiber in those carbs. Bring some protein with it as well, because protein also will break down slowly in the gut. So one way we get our appetite satisfied and not allow insulin to trigger these food addiction chemicals in the brain is we make sure that the carbs we eat, because remember, muscles want them, we make sure that the carbs we eat have fiber and we eat them with protein. This is a basic nutrition law, right? This is just easy, basic stuff that's all about biochemistry. Because when you're talking about sugar, it's not about looking if you have no sugar in your diet. It's about knowing how to balance it. It's when the sugar gets in the blood. That's the issue. It's not the fact that it's in the gut and that you are balancing it, because remember, the muscles do want some of that sugar. It's understanding the glycemic problem of when it gets in the gut. So let's talk about carbohydrates and fiber. So huge, right? Because we're using fiber to slow down those carbs to help that insulin not surge and create that hunger appetite. But also the gut gets balanced with fiber, and it creates a lot of these good bacteria that promote immune balance, these short-chain fatty acids, and a lot of these bacteria can travel up to the brain stem, can travel through into the hypothalamus, into the appetite center in the brain, and actually can create satiety. This is huge. So we know fiber, when it's fermented in the gut, has huge, huge properties to help create satiety in the brain. So this are some really key points, is that if you really want to stop this brain from being hijacked, it's understanding not about eliminating carbs. Now, a lot of people will think that if they eliminate carbs, well then, this seems to work, because when they eliminate carbs, then they eliminate the insulin rush. And I get it. I can understand that, which would be why the keto diet seems on the front of it to be working pretty good, because you do the keto diet, and when you start it, that's the high fat diet, low carb diet, you find you're not hungry. And this is why. You hit one of them. Beautiful, beautiful for you. But you got two more you're not paying attention to. Muscles are still not happy. They want the carbs. And gut bacteria is not going to be balanced because you can't just eat all these high-fat animal foods and think everybody's fine in the gut. It's not going to be. So it might work for a period of time because you had one of them right? Or maybe you're doing a vegan diet and you're really high in fiber and everything seems to be great. But oh my gosh, this vegan diet you're doing that's super high in fiber, you're just loading up on way too many carbs. And you're causing a lot of insulin rush, right? Maybe not understanding how many carbs you need. Or maybe you just don't get that muscles want carbs because over a period of time, they're going to ring the bell and say, hey, what about me? So if you don't want your brain to be hijacked, then a simple solution is understand the importance of carbs and how to eat them in relationship to muscles, insulin, and gut bacteria. Okay. I want to try to keep the streams low in time because that's one of the feedback I got. Give it to us, Myrna, but we just want it quick and easy. So hopefully I'm doing that. Go ahead and let me know with some feedback. Also, if it's impactful, that's super important. That's why I'm doing it. Also, I want to make it open in the chat if there's any questions, which is why I do the live stream.
No questions today.
Sammy, awesome. So hopefully this helps. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe. Thank you so much. And what else do I want to say, Sam?
Just if there's any topic ideas.
Yeah, topic ideas are good. I'm always going to make them impactful. So even if you give me a topic, I'm going to be thinking about how do I change your life through nutrition, easy things you can do that can make a huge difference in your life. Because nutrition will do that. Okay, so awesome. We have nobody asking questions.
Nope.
I think we're good.
All good.
Thank you guys. See you later.